Not looking too good. Let's talk about the M3. The E46 M3. This car has always held a special place in my heart as one of my all-time favorites. Growing up, I was primarily obsessed with two cars, the Lamborghini Countach and the E46 M3. And the reason I was obsessed with the M3 so much was because of its race car variant, the M3 GTR. To me as a kid, that was the coolest thing mankind had ever produced. It had a V8 up front, big wing out back, big swooping fender flares, and a side exhaust that shot flames at Porsches when it passed them on the track. Coolest thing ever. And naturally, as a child in 2005, my favorite game to play, unsurprisingly, was Need for Speed Most Wanted. I put an alarming amount of hours into this game. And I remember I would be telling my mom about this game, saying, like, oh, it's so awesome. I was running from the cops and they couldn't catch me because my M3 is so fast. And after getting a stern lesson on why running from the cops is a bad idea, she would tell me about her M3 that she used to have. This one. It was an E30 M3 in Alpine White. And she would always tell me about how it was the best car she'd ever owned, and she always regretted getting rid of it because it was just such a joy to drive and it had amazing handling, and she'd go on and on about that. And hearing her talk about it in such high regard just really solidified the M3 as the best car I ever made in my head. So the car pretty much lived up to my expectations. I daily drove it for a while and I was over the moon. I was so happy to have this car, and I was really glad to have gotten in it when I did because prices were climbing really, really fast, and I knew that if I waited too long, I wasn't ever going to be able to get this car, and I'm really glad that it worked out the way it did. I also set my expectations a bit more realistically because at my price point, I knew that the car was not going to be perfect and was going to have some problems. But every E46 M3 pretty much has the same problems unless it wasn't maintained well. And so no matter what price point you're at, you're still going to have to put in about the same amount of work in order to bulletproof the car. So I was really focusing on just getting one that was in decent condition, and I was going to focus on the mechanical bits after I bought it. And the big three are the subframe reinforcement, the rod bearing replacement, and the Vanos rebuild, where you rebuild the Vanos system and get a re-drilled pump disc so it doesn't shear tabs off of the exhaust hub. And mine is in pretty decent condition, and especially when you compare it to the more expensive cars that I was looking at in the $10,000 to $12,000 range for a 6-speed car, some of them were a little bit rough. And mine's not perfect, but it looks pretty good, and it was also the cheapest M3 in the country when I bought it. I mean, an SMG car was bottom dollar, like $9 grand when I bought this car, and that would have been fine. I would have been fine with an SMG car because I could just convert it to a manual transmission. It's not that bad. But I really would just like to have gotten in a manual car because I was already going to be doing the other work and I didn't want one more thing to have to do. I paid $7,000 for this car, which is expensive, but for an M3 was super cheap. And I was told that the subframe reinforcement had already been done, so I was like, awesome, that's one less thing that I have to do. I can just do the rod bearings and the Vanos and just replace some bushings here and there to get the car where I wanted it. And it had good maintenance records. I was pretty happy with it. And I looked underneath the car and I saw that it had the subframe reinforcement done, or so I thought. Unfortunately, as you can tell, the subframe is back out of the car. It's on the ground over there. And it's not the subframe that's the problem. Everyone always calls it the subframe reinforcement because it's easier to say. But what it really is where the subframe mounts to the chassis is a bit too flexible on the trunk floor, and it starts to crack over time from all the movement. And so you have to pull the subframe out, drill the cracks out to stop them from spreading, weld them back up, grind them flat, and then weld in these reinforcement plates that just give it a bit more structure in the mounting areas. When the previous owner did it, they did not do it right. And so now I'm doing it again. And let me show you why I'm having to do it again. Today, my goal is to drop the gas tank and get ready to start, welding up and grinding and avoiding setting my car on fire by having a tank full of fuel. I'm a little bit worried because I think there might be a little bit of gas in there, and I don't remember if I ran the car empty before pulling it in because I was in the middle of buying a house and all that. So let me show you. So I'm underneath the car. I saw the reinforcement plates here and thought everything was okay. And at first glance, it looks like it's been done correctly, except it's hard to see on camera, but those aren't welds. That's just excess material seeping out from underneath the plate. It looks like they used some sort of panel bond instead of actually welding up the plate. And you know, I saw these plates in there and assumed that it had been done correctly. The only reason I noticed that there was a problem at all was because I started experiencing a wheel hop issue under acceleration and when I was drifting the car. So I pulled the subframe out and I popped off the front 2 reinforcement plates and saw some pretty horrible stuff. So this is one of the front mounts on the left side of the vehicle, and I had to hammer this all back together because it was starting to peel apart and just rip itself to shreds. Whoever did this repair did it so horribly wrong by just panel bonding. They didn't even weld up the cracks. I mean, you can see they knew the cracks were there, and I know that these aren't new cracks because they drilled the end of it, but they didn't actually weld up the crack and then grind it flat. I just don't understand not going through the full amount of effort to properly fix your car with something as serious as this. So I've got to go through and weld all of this up and then grind all of it down. So it's going to be super, super boring. So looking at this side, you can see I haven't been able to really sand this down. That's some of the material that they were using. This one's all cracked all over. It is just bad. So unfortunately, this is the gas tank. So it's in my way. I got to drop this, and then that way I can sand this, grind it, weld it, and not worry about blowing up my car and my house. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this gas tank dropped. I gotta start up top and then transition underneath here so I can actually drop it down. I gotta disconnect some stuff underneath the rear bench. So let's go do that. So starting back here, I've got a blanket that's disintegrating in the back of my car. I used this car when I was moving and I left that there. But starting back here, I'm gonna remove this rear bench seat, and that's pretty easy. You just gotta kind of pull up like that. But I'm gonna get that popped out, and then I'm gonna open up the access ports underneath so that way we can get to the fuel pump and sender unit. All right, so first order of business, I need to clean this out. It's a bit gross in here, but I've got my trusty Makita, and I'm going to pull these covers off. And underneath them, let me gather these so I don't lose them. There we go. You're gonna have your fuel pump on this side, and the sender unit is gonna be under that one. So I'm gonna get these disconnected, and then I can go underneath and start pulling the gas tank. stuck. All right, so the gas tank has been lowered a bit. Just making note of where everything is. I need to disconnect these so that way I can lower the gas tank a bit more. And there we go. The gas tank out of an M3. I've got my OSHA certified flip-flops on, don't judge. Ugh. That's the gas tank out of my M3. I'm a bit dirty, so I think I'm gonna go have a shower. I'm gonna consider this a good victory for the day, but up next, I'm gonna be grinding down those spots, welding them up, and getting ready to put it all back together. So stay tuned. Oh man. Why is this so full? I did not think this through. Wow, my hands are filthy.